Welcome back to Kuma English Listening Hub. In today's episode, we are heading up, not into the clouds exactly, but onto the rooftops. We're going to explore the surprising world of urban beekeeping and how thousands of tiny insects are quietly transforming some of the noisiest cities on the planet. At first glance, bees and cities sound like a rather unlikely combination. When you picture a beehive, you might imagine a meadow in the countryside, a hedgerow in Kent, or a cottage garden in the Cotswolds, not the top of an office block in central London. Yet that is precisely where many hives are now found, balanced on flat roofs, tucked away in community gardens, or nestled beside railway lines. In this episode, we will look at why urban beekeeping has taken off, what it actually involves, and why it is not quite as straightforwardly wonderful as some glossy lifestyle magazines would have you believe. We will also hear how bees are acting as unexpected ambassadors for nature in some of the most built-up environments on Earth. Let's start with the basic question. Why on earth would anyone want to keep bees in a city? On a purely practical level, bees do rather well in many urban areas. It sounds counterintuitive, but cities can offer a surprisingly rich buffet of flowers throughout the growing season. In a place like London or Manchester, you might have roses in front gardens, lavender in window boxes, blossom trees lining the streets, and wildflowers poking up along canal towpaths. When you add in parks, cemeteries, allotments, and neglected railway sidings, you end up with a patchwork of habitats that can keep bees well fed from early spring to late autumn. Compare that with some modern farmland, where enormous fields of a single crop may bloom for only a couple of weeks. Once that brief feast is over, the landscape can become something of a floral desert. So while the countryside is still crucial for pollinators, it is not automatically the paradise one might romantically imagine. In that sense, the city, with its messy mixture of plants, can actually be spot on for bees. But there is another reason urban beekeeping has become fashionable. In an age when people are glued to screens and constantly checking their phones, bees offer something entirely different: a slow, seasonal ritual. Opening a hive is the opposite of scrolling through social media. You have to move gently, pay attention to tiny details, and accept that nature has its own timetable. If you are heavy-handed or impatient, the bees will very quickly let you know. Many city beekeepers describe it as almost meditative. After a day of emails and meetings, they climb the stairs to the roof, zip up their bee suits, and enter a completely different world. They listen to the changing pitch of the buzzing, watch the workers returning with their pollen baskets full, and look for the queen moving calmly across the frame. The rest of life, with all its deadlines and dramas, falls away for a moment. Of course, it is not all terribly idyllic. Anyone who has lifted a full brood box on a hot day knows that beekeeping is physically demanding. One moment you feel marvelously in tune with nature. The next you realize you have put your back out and you are absolutely knackered. The modern boom in urban beekeeping really gathered pace in the early 2000s. Concerns about declining bee populations were making headlines, and bees were being hailed as miniature superheroes, responsible for pollinating a large proportion of the food we eat. The idea of saving the bees became a kind of shorthand for caring about the environment. In cities like London, Paris, and Berlin, community groups, schools, and even luxury hotels started installing hives. Nude honey on high-end breakfast buffets suddenly became a selling point. You could order a posh afternoon tea with honey sourced from the very roof above your head. It was all terribly on-trend. In London alone, the number of registered beekeepers has risen dramatically, with hives popping up on museums, banks, and corporate headquarters. Some of these projects are genuinely thoughtful, linked to wider schemes for planting wildflowers and improving biodiversity. Others, it must be said, have been more about good publicity than good ecology. And this brings us to a slightly awkward question. Can you have too many bees in a city? Many environmental experts now argue that, in some urban areas, the problem is not a lack of honeybees, but a lack of flowers. Honeybees are just one species among thousands of pollinators, including bumblebees, solitary bees, hoverflies, beetles, butterflies, and moths. If we cram in more and more managed hives without increasing the nectar and pollen available, All these creatures end up competing for the same limited resources. In places where the density of hives has become particularly high, there is evidence that wild bees can struggle to find enough food, especially in late summer. It is a bit like adding more and more guests to a dinner party without increasing the amount of food on the table. At some point, somebody is going to go hungry. So, while the image of the bee-covered hive on a smart rooftop is rather charming, it is not the whole story. The health of urban pollinators depends not just on the number of hives, but on the availability of decent foraging and suitable nesting sites across the city. This is why many ecologists now urge would-be beekeepers to ask themselves a simple question before rushing out to buy a hive. Are you doing this for the bees or for yourself? If you are genuinely keen on helping pollinators, they say, you might achieve more by planting native flowers, creating a small pond, or leaving part of your garden a bit wild, rather than adding another hive to an already crowded neighborhood. That does not mean urban beekeeping is a bad thing. Far from it. It simply means that, like any fashionable hobby, it needs to be done responsibly. The most thoughtful urban beekeepers see themselves as part of a wider network of efforts to make cities more hospitable for all forms of life, not just their own colonies. So, what does it actually involve, this business of keeping bees in a city? First, there's the question of location. In cramped urban settings, every square meter counts. A good hive site needs to be secure, reasonably sheltered from strong winds, and accessible enough that you can reach it without too much drama. Hauling heavy boxes and equipment up multiple flights of narrow stairs is nobody's idea of a relaxing weekend, however romantic the view may be at the top. Rooftop hives have become iconic, but they are not the only option. Some are placed in inner city orchards, on the balconies of tower blocks, or at the far end of school playgrounds. The key is to ensure the bees have a clear flight path and are not emerging directly into a busy footpath or children's play area. While honeybees are generally peaceable when left alone, they can become defensive if they feel the hive is under threat. Then there is the question of neighbors. In a dense city, people live cheek by jowl. You cannot simply plonk a hive next to someone's washing line and hope for the best. Responsible beekeepers talk to their neighbors in advance, explain what they are planning, and answer questions. A bit of open communication can make all the difference between a supportive community and an ongoing feud about stings and swarms. Swarms, incidentally, are one of the more dramatic aspects of beekeeping. On a warm spring day, a strong colony may decide it is time to divide. The old queen leaves with thousands of workers, forming a swirling cloud that eventually clusters on a fence post or lamppost. To someone who has never seen it before, it can look absolutely terrifying, like something out of a disaster film. In reality, a swarming colony is usually at its least aggressive. The bees are gorged on honey and focused on finding a new home, not on attacking passersby. Still, when it happens in a busy street, it can cause mild chaos. Phones come out, social media fills with slightly hysterical videos, and somebody inevitably calls the council. Many urban beekeepers volunteer as swarm collectors, dashing across town in their suits to carefully gather the cluster and rehouse it. For them, it is all in a day's work. For onlookers, it is often the first time they have ever thought seriously about bees, beyond the vague idea that they make honey and occasionally sting people at picnics. And that, perhaps, is one of the quiet triumphs of urban beekeeping. It makes the invisible visible. In a city where nature can feel distant or ornamental, bees offer a tangible connection to the living world. You cannot watch a worker bee returning to the hive, her legs thick with bright yellow pollen, without being reminded that there is a whole web of life ticking away beneath the hum of traffic and the glow of office lights. Urban beekeeping has also entered the cultural imagination. In recent years, bees have appeared in novels, films, and art exhibitions as symbols of resilience, community, and environmental fragility. In Britain, there are walking tours that take you past hidden hives in central London, and workshops where you can learn to taste the subtle differences between honeys from different postcodes. Honey, after all, is one of the most immediate rewards of beekeeping. Urban honey can be remarkably distinctive, reflecting the variety of local flowers. A jar from North London might have hints of lime blossom from street trees, while one from a more industrial area might contain surprising floral notes from railway embankments and scruffy verges. It is a far cry from the anonymous blended honey you find on many supermarket shelves. Yet any experienced beekeeper will tell you that if you are getting into it purely for the honey, you may be in for a shock. By the time you have bought the equipment, paid for training, and invested countless hours in inspections, you will probably have produced the most expensive honey of your life. It is a labor of love, not a quick route to artisanal riches. Training, incidentally, is non-negotiable. Proper beekeeping is not something you can pick up from a few YouTube clips and a bit of wishful thinking. In the UK, local associations across the country run courses, often linked to the British Beekeepers Association. Newcomers learn about bee biology, seasonal management, disease control, and the ethics of keeping livestock in a crowded environment. The word livestock may sound odd here, but it is worth emphasizing. Bees are not simply wild creatures you happen to have in a box. Once you start managing a hive, you take on responsibilities. You need to monitor for diseases and parasites, such as the notorious varroa mite, which can devastate colonies if left unchecked. You also need to ensure your bees have enough food to get through winter, even if that means feeding them sugar syrup when natural stores are low. This is where some of the romanticism falls away, and you are left with something more sober and complex. You are not just keeping bees. You are managing thousands of lives that depend, at least in part, on your competence. Despite these challenges, for many people, urban beekeeping has been genuinely life-changing. It has led them to volunteer with local conservation groups, to lobby councils for better planting schemes, and to rethink their own consumption habits. Once you have seen how hard bees work to produce a single jar of honey, you may find yourself rather less inclined to waste food or treat nature as an endless resource. There is also a subtle social dimension. Hives have a way of bringing people together. On a housing estate, a shared beekeeping project can create new connections between residents who might otherwise barely say hello. In a school, a hive can turn abstract lessons about pollination and ecosystems into something immediate and thrilling. Watching children stand stock still in bee suits, listening intently to the buzz around them, is oddly moving. In corporate settings, beekeeping has sometimes been rolled out as a kind of ecological window dressing, slapped onto sustainability reports alongside recycling bins and cycle-to-work schemes. Yet, even there, it can have unexpected consequences. An employee who spends their lunch break checking hives on the roof may start to question more fundamental aspects of their company's environmental impact. Symbolic gestures, once experienced up close, can prompt more serious reflection. So, where does all this leave us? Urban beekeeping is neither a miracle cure for environmental problems, nor a pointless trend to be dismissed with a roll of the eyes. It sits somewhere in between. A fascinating, slightly messy experiment in cohabiting with another species in dense human settlements. If done thoughtfully with proper training, consideration for neighbors, and a commitment to improving the wider urban habitat, it can be a brilliant way of reconnecting people with nature and supporting pollinators. If done carelessly, piling hive upon hive onto already stretched landscapes, it risks becoming yet another way humans put their own desires ahead of ecological balance. For English learners at an advanced level, urban beekeeping also offers a rich seam of language. It combines technical vocabulary from biology and ecology with the everyday realities of city life, and it lends itself to ethical debates about responsibility, fashion, and genuine environmental change. You can discuss cost-benefit trade-offs, unintended consequences, and the tension between symbolism and substance, all through the lens of a creature no larger than your thumb. As you listen back to this episode, you might like to consider a few questions. First, if you live in a city, would you be happy to have a beehive on your roof or in your building's courtyard? Why or why not? Second, do you think it is better to support managed honeybees, which are already numerous, or to focus more on wild pollinators that often receive less attention? How would you justify your view? And third, can you think of other urban hobbies that started out as well-meaning trends, but which turned out to be more complicated than they first appeared? What lessons can we draw from those examples when we consider the future of urban beekeeping? Whatever your answers, one thing is fairly clear. As long as humans continue to crowd into cities, we will need to find ways of weaving other forms of life into these concrete and glass landscapes. Bees, with their tireless foraging and intricate societies, are already playing a modest yet significant role in that story. Next time you are walking through a city park or past a scruffy patch of weeds by a bus stop, pause for a moment and listen. Beneath the roar of traffic and the chatter of commuters, you might just hear the soft, insistent hum of thousands of wings at work. And if you do, you will know that urban beekeeping is not just a curious hobby for a handful of enthusiasts in white suits. It is part of a broader, ongoing negotiation about how we live with the rest of the natural world, even in places where, at first glance, nature seems to have been crowded out altogether. That's all for now from Kuma English Listening Hub. Thanks for listening, and cheers for sticking with some of the more intricate language along the way. Until next time, keep your ears open, your curiosity buzzing, and your English learning properly sorted.